Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast. Today we're talking to Jason Blyth. His story is all about how the power of Yah can free you from anything and break all the chains of bondage and anxiety and depression and childhood abuse and like strange sexuality and all this stuff. So, all right, before any of that, also, I got to give a disclaimer and a warning that this episode is not okay for kids. So don't watch it with your kids. We're going to get into all sorts of wild things. Jason had an interesting life. We're going to get into the occult and into Freemasonry, into all sorts of strange stuff with that, and in the dark underbelly of the music industry as well. So I'll tell you, though, that it's a wild ride, and it is our first Kiwi. Jason is our first New Zealander who is joining us and who now lives in Australia. So we're happy to have him, and I know that you're going to enjoy his testimony. Without further ado, I give you Jason. Jason, thank you so much for being on the Life Podcast.
Thank you, bro. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to hear about your life.
Thanks, man. It's been a pretty hectic one, and I guess, like everyone says, the best place to start is probably at the beginning. But for me, my testimony starts in a bit of a strange set of circumstances well before I was even born. So it really starts with my mum. And by the time my mum was 16, she was a really, really gifted child. She was training with the New Zealand Olympic swimming team. At the time, she was taking world-class piano exams with the likes of pianists that have gone on to become full-on world-class musicians today. And she was about to leave school early to go and start study dentistry. So she was really, really gifted and had her whole life ahead of her. Grew up in a good family, and one afternoon when she was traveling home from school, she was on the back of a motorbike that she wasn't supposed to be on with a boyfriend that she wasn't supposed to have. And as they travelled through a roundabout, a vehicle clipped the back of the bike and sent them flying. My mum went flying through the air and landed far from the bike on her head and was instantly knocked unconscious and put into a coma. So once she arrived at hospital, it was very quickly determined that she was brain dead. So the doctors eventually said to my grandparents, after putting her on a ventilator for life support, that she would never be anything more than a bedside vegetable. So my grandparents decided eventually the best course of action would be to switch off her life support and let her pass away. So they did, and as the ventilator was turned off, she was expected to die, but she started to breathe on her own. So this was the first part of a very genuine miracle. But she was still brain dead. So there was totally unresponsive, but breathing on her own. So very much as the doctor said, she was literally a bedside vegetable. So my grandma told me much later on that she felt the hospital wanted their bed back. There was nothing they could do really more for her other than just to keep her in this bed. So my grandparents took her home. My grandma nursed her for quite a while. And eventually one afternoon when an uncle was in the room with her and was just sitting there, after 6 months of being in a coma, she woke up just out of the blue. And the first thing she did was ask for a cigarette. So I don't know, she was an athlete. Well, shouldn't have been smoking, shouldn't have been on that motorbike. Anyway, she obviously had some skeletons in the closet that she was trying to hide from my family, but obviously no one was angry. But when she did wake up, make no mistake that her life as we knew it before was completely over. She was no longer the person that she was before she had that accident. And she woke up whole right side, completely paralyzed. Many months of rehabilitation just to learn to walk, to write. She had to learn to write with her left hand. And she has a permanent brain injury, and to this day. So she's never worked. She's got a lot of physiological issues, like she slurs her speech. She's got a lazy eye. She's got really very bad motor skills. Couldn't catch a ball to save her life. Struggles to walk. Her memory's like a goldfish. It just total wiping of the memory. And her emotional regulation is almost non-existent. She could go from hysterically laughing to crying or to rage like that. So that'll be something important to remember for later on in the story. So anyway, obviously there was a genuine miracle. To this day, there's no medical explanation whatsoever for her survival. There just isn't. And so until the day my grandma died 5 years ago, she maintained categorically that my mum's survival was a genuine miracle. So my mum needed a lot of care, and as I said, she's never been able to work. So my grandparents became her primary caregivers. She got a lot of compensation and that kind of stuff to help facilitate rehabilitation and just help her with everyday things. So this was back in New Zealand. But fast forward 10 years, and my mum met my biological father, Mark, who was living in Nelson, where I was eventually born at the time. And my biological father has a long history of being involved with pretty hectic gangs in New Zealand, a lot of criminal activity. 20-year heroin addict. He was a jockey, so 5'0". Thankfully, I got a lot more height than that. Otherwise, it would have been a far harder life for me, I think.
He was actually a jockey, like a horse jockey? Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, that was his job. Yeah, well, his legal job, where he got his legal money, maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, he was very heavily involved in some pretty bad stuff. So eventually my mum and him met because he put a classified ad in the newspaper seeking friends. So my mum obviously decided that she wanted some friends, and she responded to this ad, but they did just become friends, and they developed a bit of a friendship. But he eventually moved away to Wellington, so the capital of New Zealand. And then one Sunday, when my family was Catholic, they went to church on Sunday, and my mum was really inspired to want to help him because the priest had given this sermon on this, like, Good Samaritan type sermon, which was about helping the down and out and the downtrodden. So she convinced my grandparents to let her go to Wellington and help Mark out. He'd fallen on a pretty difficult time, which was probably through his own fault. But anyway, she was really keen to want to help this guy out. So she went for a week to Wellington. And when she returned back, again, she wasn't the same person that she was when she left. So there was some kind of trauma that had happened, and it was obvious. You know, I wasn't able to hide the fact that she'd been affected by something. And eventually it came out that one night, in the middle of the night, Mark snuck into her room and he raped her. So she was obviously really traumatized from this. My mum was a virgin at the time, and this was her first sexual encounter of being raped by this guy. And then fast forward a little bit more time, it turned out that my mum was pregnant, and she was pregnant with me. So that's how I was conceived and how I came into the world. So I came into the world under strange circumstances, and to this day, I've still never met another child that was born of rape. I know they're out there, but to this day, I've never met one. So these were the circumstances surrounding my birth, and from a very young age, it felt like there was a dark identity attached to my life. There were these things that had happened to shape my eventual journey into this earth that was totally outside of my control. I had no say over these things that would dramatically shape who I was to become. And from a very early age, you know, growing up with my mum, my grandparents had to decide whether my mum was capable of raising a child, because she wasn't physically capable of doing that. They were Catholic, so abortion was no option. It wouldn't exist. So it was whether they were going to keep me or I was going to be adopted out. But eventually, I think they thought there was obviously some kind of divine hand on her life, at least, just because of everything that had happened. And as they had a really strong faith, albeit in the Catholic faith, they did have a strong faith, and they decided to take me on board and to help raise me and help my mum raise me. So for the first 3 years of my life, we lived with my grandparents. And early on, when I was born, my mum, she rejected me because I reminded her, obviously, of being raped and Mark, so the trauma of my biological father. So I had this mum that was completely unstable and unable to control her emotions. And whenever I would cry, and as I got older, becoming a toddler, and I'd run around and do things as kids do, it became far too much for her to handle. And my first psychiatry appointment was when I was 2 years and 9 months old, so 33 months old, because my mum was trying to kill me because I reminded her of this rape. So yeah, grew up with a lot of fear, grew up with a lot of violence. After around three, my mum got married to my stepdad. And then a year later, my half-brother was born when I was 4. So that changed things. We then moved away from the safety of my grandparents and into a home with my stepdad and a new baby, my younger brother. And anytime my younger brother would cry, and as we got older and we'd fight and play as brothers do, my mum would instantly turn her rage towards me if there was any inclination that my brother was upset. So she would grab belt buckles and crack them around my face and all over my body. She'd stomp on my head, boot me in the head, boot me in the body while I curled up in a ball. She'd chuck knives at me. She'd pour boiling water on me. There was a report in my mental health records from when I was 8 that I told the psych that she'd stabbed me. So I grew up with a lot of instability and went through a lot of different mental health professionals for a very long time. My mum was sent to a lot of anger management courses and all different types of things to try and help her. But there are reports that said that she's brain injured. She's got a bad memory. There's zero chance that this is going to change, and she's dangerous for Jason. But still, no one ever took me away from her care permanently. So I did live for periods of my life between my grandparents and my mum and my stepdad, but I was never fully taken away.
I feel like in America, we have this child protective services. I feel like they would just zoom in and they would try to confiscate you, even if everything was fine at home.
You'd think so. Yeah, you'd think so. So there were a lot of reports. There was definitely investigations that were started. There was different psychiatrists and psychologists that I was going to see and that my mum was made to go and see as well. I think my grandparents were a big catalyst for me staying there because, they would try and keep me involved in the family. But yeah, this is one of the big things that I'll get to a bit more about it as we go along. But yeah, I was never taken away, even though there were reports that, this was a dangerous living environment for me in particular.
This episode of the Life Podcast is brought to you by The Way documentary, The Truth, Reformation 2.0 Apologetics book, and Truth Tracks. The Way documentary tells the story of our movement. This is the story of people who were trading Easter ham for Passover lamb and Sunday church for Saturday Sabbath, all in an effort to live like their Savior. It dives into their stories through their own voices and into the history and theology that show how the church got to where it is today. The Truth, Reformation 2.0 is the only book of its kind, an all-encompassing theological treatise that answers every question a mainstream Christian might have about why you want to keep Torah. And finally, Truth Tracks are small comics, beautifully illustrated, that use stories and scripture to remind Christians that once we are saved by grace through faith, we are called to live and do the instructions of Yah, his Torah. If you want to learn more about any of these products, go to thewaydoc.com. That's theway, D-O-C, like documentary.com.
I have one more question, sorry, about this. At the time, did you have any idea that this wasn't normal?
Yeah, I definitely did. I think everyone knows. I think we all kind of have an understanding of what is truly right and wrong. I think the Father puts a conscience in us to know that. And this was a big part of, from that 2 years old until I left home at 15, I had seen probably about 15 to 20 different clinicians between child psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists. And I told these people as we were going through, and I've got my mental health records here that are that thick from till I was 15 years old. I told these people there's reports in there of the stuff that was going on. There was reports of me turning up to school with injuries, still got scars on my hands and stuff from when my mum had clawed me, and all these different things. An investigation, when I was 11 years old, I went to we call him a GP, just a general medical doctor, and I begged this doctor for help in front of my mum. I told him everything that had gone on, and he wrote this report and was like, I can't believe this 11-year-old came and was so brave and told me exactly what had happened. And he said that he was saddened that this was the situation because he'd been our family doctor for 20 years, like seeing my grandparents, my mum, like all of my aunties and uncles. And he wrote a report that got sent to what we call child family services in New Zealand, which also had to be investigated by the police as well. And an investigation was started, but the clinical caseworker or whatever eventually ended up leaving the organisation, and the case was never handed on. So it was like these sorts of things just kept happening. So I don't know if this was the father's involvement, just to facilitate a certain life or whatever, but all these kinds of things kept happening. And I eventually, at the end of 2022, I settled a historic abuse claim with the New Zealand government, who admitted fault, admitted they didn't do what they should have done. They gave me a measly amount of compensation. But the whole process took 4 years from start to finish, just because of the amount of historic abuse claims that were going against the New Zealand government. Like it was prolific, and this would be probably in any Western nation, the absolute failure of these institutions to actually take care of the most vulnerable people on the face of the earth. So it's a big part about, the sort of stuff that I'm looking to do, and doing now with my testimony, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, man, I grew up, I became very untrusting because I would spend a lot of time talking to these clinicians and trusting in them with the stuff that I was telling them as a really, really little kid, believing that something was going to change, asking to be taken away. And I never was. So between being at home with an extremely violent mum, not by my mum, but I was also sexually abused from a really young age. So I was being completely traumatized. But whenever my mum, she would snap, I mentioned before, obviously she could go from hysterically laughing to rage like that. I learned to become extremely hyper-vigilant and hyper-aware of my surroundings, so I could sense the smallest change in her. And as soon as something would happen and I got to the age where I could run away, I would run straight for the door and I would get out into our big backyard, where I would just hide in the backyard until 20, 30 minutes later, when, as I said, her mind she'd forget and I could sneak back in the house. But growing up, I knew that if she had physically caught me at times, she certainly would have killed me. So this was the environment that I grew up in. I grew up with a lot of fear. And then I told these people who had the power to change my circumstance and who never did. No one ever changed anything. And it was a huge frustration for me because that's really an understatement, like a frustration. Because going into these political appointments, I've got a report there from when I was 8 years old. And even then I knew there was a huge injustice of what was happening, because I went in there and I was like, why am I the one that has to come to these appointments? I'm telling you about all this abuse and you're making me come to these appointments. Shouldn't it be the people that are abusing me that should be coming to these appointments? Yet I was being made out to be this problem child, which was I was becoming, as you could probably imagine. But this is one of my big gripes with the mental health field, is they just treat symptoms. No kid is born like a full psychopath. No kid's born a rapist, a murderer. I don't believe that. Or, a pedophile. We're products of our environment, right? So if they'd looked at me and gone, this 8-year-old and even younger kid is a bad kid, wouldn't the question be to look at the family or look at the people who are the primary caregivers as to maybe why this kid was bad? Anyway, it absolutely baffles me, and I could rant on this for the next couple of hours, but I'll save you that, and we can do that at another time. So anyway, very untrusting, grew up really untrusting with the whole thing, was totally aware that this wasn't right. I asked for help. It never came. So I was becoming traumatized through a lot of the physical violence. I was being sexually groomed as well, and from about 3 years and onwards until at least 30, every single friendship of mine and every relationship was geared around sex. I was a super hypersexual person, and I absolutely categorically became a sex addict. And again, product of my environment. So I was very aware of sex from 3 years old and onwards. As I said, every friendship I had, every friend my brother had going through school and all that, it was always for me a way to feel validation. I subconsciously knew, I guess, that my identity and my worth was based in sex and my body. So for a really long time, had a really unhealthy relationship around sex and would just try and validate myself by having as much sex with as many different people as possible. And it was completely dangerous and reckless. So obviously, as this sort of started to happen and I was at school, people knew my mum was brain damaged. I would turn up with injuries. I was a weedy little kid, and I was obviously different just because of the environment that I was growing up in. I sought attention and I did things to seek attention. And I'd be taken out of schools most Wednesdays to go to these psych appointments. So I got bullied and I got teased a lot. So I had no place at home, no place at school. People didn't want to help me in the psychological field. So I just felt really lost, alone, all through my youth. Look, I knew God was real. As I said, I grew up in a Catholic family, so I got a really basic understanding of the faith, but I just knew God was real, and I think we kind of all do. I just didn't know him exactly how I know him today.
If I can ask this question, for the sexual abuse part, who was responsible for that? Like, who was grooming you? Was this the stepfather? If you're willing to talk about this, or we can skip over that and move and continue.
Honestly, Matt, it's one of these things that I'm not quite sure. With my understanding of how a lot of trauma works is that up to 50% of trauma victims have complete blackout memories of certain events. I don't know.
You're so young. How could you even know? How could you find the beginning?
And it's happening from a super young age. And I definitely know that with in particular, like when I was being beaten, I would definitely compartmentalize and disassociate in those moments, of being beaten as a little kid and having no help and being in pain, crawling up on a ball on the floor. This was certainly something that happened to me for a very long time, of being able to dissociate from my reality. So I don't know if it was one person or multiple people. All I can tell you is that there's no way that like a 3-year-old kid and onwards knows what to do sexually. It's a learned behavior. We've all been around kids. It's not the natural inclination for kids to do that unless they're being taught this sort of stuff.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah. So again, a lot of bullying at school. I was completely lost. Then the only person that I had a lot of questions around my existence. I was really angry at God because I was like, what have I done to deserve this life that I was given? When I looked at my life versus everyone else in the community around me, whether it's school or through sports organizations or anything, no one came even remotely close to having the life that I had or the circumstances of my life. My mom, the way I was born, the violence, all this kind of stuff. I was totally outside, and it was like I felt like an alien as a kid in this world around me. No one wanted to help, as I said. So I'd cry out to God and I'd ask him these questions of why. But the only thing that I could see was that there was this injustice and that God hated me. So in a way, I grew up with this warped mentality. I could understand that Yeshua, or Jesus as I knew him at the time, had been born of a virgin because God loved him around the circumstances of his birth and his conception. Yet here I was, born to a virgin through rape and then born into all this extreme violence. So I thought that, first of all, God hated me. But again, there was like this dark identity around my life. And I believed that I was, in a way, raised for evil. And this is kind of where my journey goes, as you'll hear. So I think that the enemy was planting seeds in me to go down a certain path. And not only was I obviously sexually groomed, but I was definitely someone that was to be groomed to go into the occult, which we'll get to at a certain point. So I was lost, dejected, angry at God, couldn't understand why I was given the life I was, hated school, was bullied there. I was a smart kid, but I just couldn't apply myself. I had behavioral problems. Like obviously I had behavioral problems that you understand of my life.
Yeah.
So I didn't really apply myself there. But one of the greatest gifts that I did have from my childhood, apart from my grandparents and mostly my grandma, because my granddad died when I was about 10, but one of the greatest gifts was I ended up getting into a lot of sport, and I was a very gifted athlete. So when I was 7 and I was living with my grandma at the time, she took me down to a family property that we had about 2 hours outside of Queenstown. And we were staying there, and she was homeschooling me. And for some days, she would take me to her sister, so my great auntie's school that she was teaching at, which was one of those classic tiny, tiny country town schools that had maybe 10 or 15 students of all ages. But it was that small a school that there weren't specific years. It was just all in primary school from first year to last year primary school. And this was the mid-90s, so everyone had rollerblades. And during all of the break times, I had my first go on skating around on blades, and I was quick and agile. And I just was naturally gifted at it, and I just smashed all these kids. And ironically enough, my grandma had been a champion ice speed skater as a kid. So she goes, "Look, do you want to try out speed skating at the local rink when we get home?" I was like, "Yeah, that'd be cool." I don't know if I said that, but anyway, it was like that. So anyway, I went to the skating rink and I started joining the local speed skating team. And from there, within a few years, I was one of the best speed skaters in the country. I went on to become a national champion, won international medals. I represented New Zealand for 6 years, went to the Junior World Championships, was selected for the New Zealand team for the World Championships for a couple of years, and ended up getting top 10s at the World Championships.
Wow.
I ended up winning a lot of swimming competitions, triathlons. I played rec soccer as well. I ended up playing in the National Youth League in New Zealand. So I was a gifted sports person. And the thing I loved about sport was it seemed like the rules actually applied. I was used to all the injustice of the rules supposed to apply to everyone in every facet of life, but it seemed like they didn't. And people could get away with breaking the rules and doing whatever they wanted. And I hated that injustice. But in sport, it seemed like the rules were followed a lot more, and it was purely about talent. And this was one area of my life that I could shine and be myself. So I gravitated a lot towards sport. It was a great outlet for me. And I know that the Father used it to protect me, which I'll get to a bit more soon, but also to teach me some lessons in life like discipline and how hard you have to work at things if you want to achieve anything in life, especially in this day and age. But I just couldn't get through school because I wasn't applying myself there, and I never went to university. So this is a different type of education that you get as like an international athlete. So I was given a lot of liberty around not doing schoolwork, not doing homework, because I was off competing in different competitions and training. So I'd train sometimes up to 4 hours a day between soccer and speed skating training from my early teens onwards. So this was one area where I got a lot of joy, but I still hid myself. I still got bullied, when I was doing speed skating because I wore Lycra, all this kind of stuff. So kids always find a way to bully you. So I still hid and felt ashamed. By the time I got to high school, so about the age of 13, 14, I hated school. Like I hated every environment that I was in. My relationship had started to break down slowly with my grandma because my behavioral issues were getting worse. I was getting a bit bigger now, and I was just becoming more angry. They were doing everything they could to try and keep me on the straight path and to keep me out of trouble because they knew that I was going down a bad path. So I had all these different mentors that my family were trying to bring in to keep me on the straight path. So I had different mentors in my skating community. I had a priest trying to mentor me. They had a local senior constable coming in every Wednesday to my house to try and scare me straight. But none of it seemed to work. And in these early years of high school, I hated school so much that I would catch the bus, the 15 Ks or 10 miles to school. And as soon as the bus got to school, I either had a soccer ball and soccer boots in a bag, and I'd run down to the park just near school and I'd play soccer all day and then catch the bus back home. Or as soon as the bus got to school, I'd walk the long way home, which would take the entire day. just to get back home, just because I didn't want to be at school. I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to be around anyone. So I just listened to my Walkman and I'd walk home, just being alone. So I was getting to this part of my life. I just felt hopeless for a long time. So I wouldn't go to school for weeks at a time unless it was a sports carnival day or something like that. And then eventually my relationship totally broke down with my grandma, who was basically my one person, the closest person I would ever say to me trusting someone. And it was at the start of 2004, I'd been selected for the Junior World Championships to go to Italy, and all of my mental health team and these people that were mentoring me convinced her not to let me go because my behavior was so bad. And she was really against not letting me go because she knew that I'd probably act really badly, and she could see how much effort I put into training and how much of my life was dedicated to sport. It was the one good, healthy area in my life. Anyway, she decided to pull the pin and I went nuts. Like, for me, it felt like the ultimate betrayal of the one person that should have known how hard I worked and should have understood how consistent I was with the sport, and the relationship broke down. I just went crazy. She ended up having to leave Nelson in an emergency. The police were called. I had to go and stay with my stepdad and my mum while she went off because she was on the verge of a mental breakdown. I never went back and lived with my grandma from that point, but I was living with my mum and my stepdad, and now I was getting bigger. So there were a lot of fights. There was blood. The police were called, all that kind of stuff. My stepdad had no authority over me. I would not listen. And then I just wouldn't go to school. So I'd just sit in my room in the dark for weeks at a time, and then I'd just take myself off to skating training or soccer practice. And it got to the point where living there was untenable. So it was either going to be that at 15 I was homeless or I went into full-time foster care. So I didn't like either of those options because I'd had a bit of foster care at different times growing up. But from there, I somehow convinced a family in the North Island of New Zealand, a skating family, to let me come and live with them so I could continue skating. So I moved to this place called Palmerston North at 15. I left home with a suitcase and my sports gear, and I went up there. And as I left, it was scary because I was young. I was 15. I was totally unprepared to leave home. But I knew I couldn't stay where I was. But the thing was, I thought that when I was leaving home, that my circumstance was going to completely change. I thought that I was going to be happy. Everything was going to be awesome. I didn't realize how traumatized I was. I thought all of my problems were circumstantial. I didn't realize that I was this traumatized, damaged kid, like an abused dog, right? Like if you've got a dog that you keep in a dark room and the only attention you pay to it is to chuck some food at it and you beat it, eventually that dog's going to bite you, right? And then if one day you leave the front door of the house open, that dog's going to run out onto the street. And the people outside, the public, are going to try and stop the dog from getting hit by the traffic. And that dog's going to bite all those people. And then the people are going to go, that's a bad dog. We need to put that dog down. But it wasn't the dog's fault. Right? That was me. So I eventually moved to this place with a friend who I skated with and his single mum. And I lived there for only a few months before that relationship fell apart. I started at school and the bullying just started there as well. Moved in with another family. That relationship broke down. So I moved in with a girlfriend. And by 16, I wasn't going to school anymore. No one could make me go. And I don't even remember if anyone tried to stop me or anything, but I just stopped going to school. I was spending all my time training for speed skating and soccer. So I'd spend hours a day just sitting on a wind trainer on a bike or down at the local park, kicking a soccer ball around. I spent time with my girlfriend. And then I went to the World Championships. And at that point in time, I was training 14 times a week. A rest day was a 50K bike ride, which is 31 miles for you guys. That was a rest day. So I was getting an education in a totally different way. But yeah, school just didn't work for me. So by 16, totally out of school and started to make some adult decisions for my life and got a bit of a taste for making my own choices. So around this time as well, I was making more decisions around sex. Yeah, I think this was just a big primary driver for me. I was on dating websites that were obviously 18 plus, but that didn't matter to me. I was meeting anyone I possibly could, male, female, whatever, for just casual sex. It was really, really dangerous and reckless. By 16, I was prostituting myself to men. Just completely like going off the rails. But sport was the one thing that was kind of keeping me there. So after I went to the World Championships in China in 2005, I made the 1,000-meter final. So I was a national champion. I was the national record holder in that event, and I was one of 7 that was in the final of the World Championships. And I think that because of the bullying and everything I'd come from, I was scared of success. And I completely self-sabotaged in that final. I never really gave it a go. Never did as good as I could. And it will be one of those moments in my life that I will forever think, what if? But it was obviously meant to be. So coming back to New Zealand wasn't long before I quit skating altogether, just totally gave that up. And from that point there, now, my life was right about to start to change.
Question, if you're willing to discuss one, let's talk about bullying later. I'd like to talk about that and like zoom in on that, but we should hear your story. But the other thing is, will you tell us what happened with the self-sabotage thing? Whatever you want to talk about around that.
Yeah, I just think that, like, I had a plan. We had a couple of world champions on our team when we were there. I was well and truly set up to have a really good crack at this race. Like I was good enough to make the world championship final, and I was good enough to have a real shot at having a go. But there was just something inside me that just said, you can't do it. Don't. And I just held myself back. I don't know what it was, but I think it was genuinely this lack of self-worth that had been programmed into me. I liken us to like a computer, and the devil or our enemy comes along and is like a hacker. We get hacked with a virus, which can we don't need any outside influence whatsoever to shut us down if we've been hacked and we've been programmed with the virus. And I think that was me, man. I'd had this whole life of feeling worthless, being bullied, being teased for being a speed skater because I wore Lycra, to the point where at one stage in 2004, I won my whole district, which was a big district, it was called Nelson Tasman, Junior Sportsman of the Year. And I wouldn't even go to school for the assembly because I knew that I would be called up and they would congratulate me, and I just felt like I'd be teased for being good at something just because of who I was. So people would bully me and tease me. That's why I didn't go to school. Why I had no interest in doing that, because I was so heavily bullied, and I hated it. I wanted to just hide and run away. So I think a part of me knew that
we call Lycra spandex. I think that's what it is, right? Okay. Just for the audience who may not, be familiar.
Yeah, if you've ever seen speed skating ice or inline speed skating, whatever, people wear skin tight spandex Lycra. So yeah, this is a big part. People tease you, call you gay, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, so I wanted to hide, man. Really, at the end of the day, when I think back on it, and I just didn't want the attention. Didn't feel I was worthy of it. I knew my life would change in a way, and I don't know if I was prepared for that. If I'd won that race, my whole career path would have changed. A lot of the guys I raced with have gone on to become Olympians and win Olympic medals and all that kind of stuff. So this was very much the path that I was on. Now, it would have been a very different path. So I don't know if it was the Father's plan or if it was just a lesson I had to learn as part of my life. But it's something that it's kind of like always there and makes me think about. But yeah, I gave up skating from that point. And I mentioned before that I think that the Father gave me international sport to protect me, because to that point, getting to around 17 now, because I was an international athlete, I was on doping registers. So I never did drugs. I wouldn't even think about doing drugs, let alone recreational drugs. And alcohol wasn't really a big part of my environment because we're training so much. It just wasn't really a part of my environment. But now that I was stopping skating, I was getting more involved with casual sex. The sphere of influence around me was changing. So I tampered with my driver's license and I changed the 1988 to a 1986, just using a bit of whiteout and a sharp tip pen. And I started going clubbing. And this was an excuse for me to find hookups and just random stuff like that, which is pretty much my primary focus. I think a lot of people's primary focus in the world. But at that point, I started drinking a lot. And this was when my demons started to come out. So when I drank, I would drink recklessly, drink a lot, and most of the time I would completely black out. So I would be totally awake, but it was no longer me that was inside my body. And until I was 30 years old, so for about 13 years now, I lost a lot of my life to being unconscious while something else took over my body. And people would commonly joke and say, oh, Jason's just hulking out, or they would call me like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I would no longer be the person that everyone was used to having around them. So yeah, started getting myself into some dangerous situations through clubbing, which the Father definitely protected me through. I won't go into too much detail, but certainly protected me from getting into some serious trouble just because of how unhinged I was. At 19, I moved from Palmerston North to Wellington, so the capital of New Zealand, and my life was about to take a pretty massive shift from here. So the relationship I was in at the time, that broke down, and I started a new relationship. But as I was about to leave Palmerston North, I very clearly remember this day where I was sitting on my couch and I watched the Australian Music Video Awards show that was on that year. And I was completely encapsulated by the ability that these musicians had to hold sway and power over an audience. And I could just feel this magnetism like drawing me, being like, I want to be a rock star. I didn't know how I could do it, but I was like, this is what I want to do. I could see the adulation and the power that they held over a crowd. And I was like, I want that. And without realizing it at the time, this was definitely a dark path that I was about to go down. And it was me seeking external validation to basically say, see, I wasn't a failure. And the world loves me when I never had this kind of stuff, this normal upbringing of normal nurturing, normal love, having normal relationships as a kid. So I was being drawn. It was like it was magnetic. I can't describe it as anything other than that. So when I moved to Wellington, this girlfriend that I had and we started a band. And for me, like, it was just a pure excuse to do whatever I want or do what thou wilt. That'll be important for a little bit later on. So as I was doing music, mate, at this stage of my life, my life had changed so quickly. I'd gone from being an international athlete like a year or two before, and now I was pretty much like an early transvestite. Like, I was weird. I wore like full makeup, like crazy bright colored makeup and lipstick smeared across my face. I had long, bright blue hair, and playing shows, I wore like chicks underwear, high heel boots, and it was literally just an excuse for me to do whatever I want and call it art. Right. So I was absolutely crazy. My idol at the time was Marilyn Manson. And I mean, that dude is full satanic. So this was what I was being idolized and indoctrinated into, and the path that I was going down. And I wanted to be the next generation's Marilyn Manson or Alice Cooper type thing. So I was trying to be like this anti-pop star type thing and just basically destroy through doing music. So through these shows, it was like heavy metal, hardcore, screaming, rap, rock, electro. It was a weird sort of hybrid thing. But I was crazy. I would have a wireless microphone. I was hardly ever on the stage. I was either under the stage, up on speaker stacks, on top of the bar, on top of tables, on the dance floor, like shoving people around, doing crazy things, covered in like fake blood and body paint and like just spitting stuff everywhere, just getting wasted. But I'd do nuts things. Like one show pretty early on in my career, I snuck 40 litres of jelly, which is 11 gallons of jelly in 4 big buckets into this venue. And about half to 3/4 of the way through the show, I just started unleashing this jelly all over the floor, chucking it in people's faces. It got all over the sound desk. People were falling over and fights were breaking out. The venue shut the whole show down, called the cops. It was like, it got really, really bad. And everyone in my band, apart from my girlfriend, quit because they were like, "You are insane. This behavior is just unacceptable." But I loved it. I was just like, I could just do whatever I want, as I said, and call it art. And it was so bad that the venue contacted every venue that we were about to go on tour to, and they said, if you don't let this band come. And then they contacted all the other bands that we were about to tour with and said, if this band, Sick Section, was the name of my band, if they come, you're not playing any of your shows. So the name of the band, Sick Section, and this whole mentality behind what I was trying to create was, I believe that every one of us has a sick part of us, whether it's like sick sexual preferences or, just wanting to party and do what thou wilt, right? Like, this was well before I ended up where I did. But I was encouraging other people to live out these sicker fantasies, and I was trying to be the role model to do that. So anyway, our shows are pretty crazy, and we got a fair bit of attention because of it. But eventually, that relationship with that girlfriend broke up, and the band sort of broke up from there as well. Had a couple of months of living in Wellington. I was really depressed and low. I felt like my whole life had imploded. I was just a mess. So I turned to the things that gave me comfort, which was getting drunk and just casual sex. So just looked for a lot of that for a couple of months, and then spur of the moment, booked flights to Sydney 10 days before I came, and then moved to Sydney at 21, which is where I currently am now. So I decided to come here because I was going to re-establish my band. There was 5 million people living in Sydney, which was the entire population of New Zealand at the time. So I thought there's going to be far more going on. So I moved here, and I lived in a hostel or a backpackers for about 3 or 4 months. And moving to Sydney was pretty dangerous for someone like me because there was far more availability for 24-hour nightclubs. There was huge availability of party drugs, which I just didn't really get in a smaller place like New Zealand. It certainly wasn't really around me a huge amount. So I got wrapped up in this hardcore scene over here, like in the heavy metal kind of music scene, where I could re-establish my band. It was just partying and getting wasted. One of my first jobs that I got in different iterations for many years, I was just selling wine. So I was in an environment where drinking was encouraged. We would be given a lot of wine as incentives. There was tastings almost every day. So I just would get wasted at work. And I was really good at sales because I could just chat. And they didn't care. They didn't care that I was blind, drunk, messy, as long as I was making sales and I wasn't really causing any issues. So I just fill up a dark coffee cup full of wine and just get smashed while I was at work. And then they'd give me free wine because I did so well, and then I'd go home and drink. So for about 8 years solid, I drank 2 bottles of red wine minimum a night for about 8 years. Just trashing my body. Had absolutely no respect for this body that the Father gave me. And I didn't value myself. So between that, moving to Australia and doing every drug that I could, on heroin, I was on crystal meth for a period of time and stuff as well, just because I wanted to try stuff, and I was just having lots of reckless casual sex, kind of the stuff that goes in that sort of scene, in the rock and roll scene. So in 2012, I got a really big invitation to go and record music in Hollywood. So my band, we got in contact with a pretty massive producer who discovered Linkin Park, Korn, Limp Bizkit, Macy Gray, and then another producer who was working with him, who worked with the likes of Sean Kingston and Snoop Dogg. So these guys were big producers. And the first one I mentioned, the way that he worked was basically he created and formed and discovered artists, sold them to big record labels, and this is pretty much how he made his money. So he's what's called an A&R. type reps. He discovers and uncovers talent and then forms them and creates a sound and sells them. And that's what we were going to do. So we went over to record what's called an EP, so like a very short album, which is kind of used for promotion to big record labels. Went over there to Hollywood for 3 weeks and recorded this EP. Kind of sold out because they wanted to make money quick, so it became like a dubstep, electro, rock, rap, pop sound. It was pretty cool, but it was definitely encouraging us to just be loose and sort of very wild. But thankfully, that all fell over. Like in hindsight, I'm thankful that it all fell over because I know that the Father had his hand on just not allowing that to happen and closing that door. Because at that stage of my life, literally, if you had said to me, look, go and do a handstand on that balcony 10 stories up there on the edge of the balcony, I would have gone and done it. I just didn't care. Like, I did not value my life. I don't care if I lived or died. I very genuinely didn't think I would make it past 30. So you could just imagine how reckless someone would be with money, with drugs, with drinking, with sex, like all that kind of stuff. I literally didn't think I was going to make it past 30. So I think that the Father had to destroy that opportunity, because had I got any level of fame or fortune at that stage, I categorically would have ended up in prison or dead. I would almost end up there a little bit later on as well. So I came back to Australia after that, and I was depressed. Like, I literally, at that stage, I was convinced, we were convinced that this was about to take off and we were going to be a massive act. So I came back completely depressed. My anxiety went crazy. This was the first time I was really dealing with very, very bad mental health issues. And for a couple of years, it just got bad, man. It got to the point where I almost stopped leaving the house because my anxiety was so bad. I would catastrophize everything. If I wouldn't mow the lawn because I would think that a stone was going to come up and hit me in the eye. I'd struggle to walk my dog because I'd think a car was going to veer off onto the footpath and crush us. And if I was at a train station, I'd have to hold on to one of the poles on the platform because I thought that I was either going to chuck myself in front of a train or some other force was going to throw me in front of a train. So I got to the point where I started planning my suicide. And for about a couple of weeks, I planned everything in great detail, what I was going to use, where I was going to hang myself, exactly what I was going to do. And on the day that I went to kill myself, I sat on the floor at the foot of the bed and I broke. I had obviously snot coming out my nose and I was just heaving, hysterical, hard to breathe. And I felt completely hopeless. And my dog, I had a big Malamute at the time, he came and just cuddled up with me and just laid on my lap. And in that moment, I remember worrying about what would happen to him. And it just snapped me out of thinking about killing myself for a moment. And as I sat there and I was wondering about what would happen to this dog, I had this very simple but powerful revelation that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And I knew that although all I'd ever known was sadness and pain and like suffering throughout all of my life, and now I was used to this feeling of depression and anxiety and not feeling worthy or like my life had any worth, and I wanted to kill myself. I realized I didn't have to feel that way, or that I shouldn't feel that way. It wasn't normal. I had normalized something that was not actually normal. It's like, although I've only ever known this, just something in me where this isn't normal. You don't have to feel like you want to kill yourself. And I resolved to go and get some help. So I went and got an appointment with a doctor who referred me to a free mental health plan to get some free counseling sessions because I had no money. And then I got referred to a psychiatrist. And bear in mind my history with the psychological field, I was very untrusting, but I knew I needed some help. And this was a key transitional moment in my life where part of me subconsciously admitted that I wasn't always right, that there was something wrong and that I needed help. And I went and started wanting to seek for something better for myself. So this was the start of a really long journey. But as I went into these psychiatric appointments, I was eventually diagnosed with bipolar 2, with anxiety, with depression. There was talk of borderline personality disorder. I was very heavily medicated on antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and antidepressants. Bear in mind, as a kid, I was labelled with ADHD, with oppositional defiance disorder, with severe reactive attachment disorder, all this kind of stuff. So I was given all these labels, and the medication helped for a while. It was something that I needed at the time because I was literally on the verge of suicide. So I had medication to squash me from being too manic and high, medication to lift me up from being too low. I was on antipsychotics and I was on sleeping medication. So I was just pumped full of drugs. But yeah, it allowed me to kind of get some stability under me. So around this time, as well, slightly after this, I started a new relationship with a girl called Maddie. That's an important name to remember. I started this new relationship, which was pretty volatile, purely because I was volatile at the time and just a bit of a loose unit. But anyway, this relationship started to develop. And as I got a little bit more stable because of my medication, I started to rethink about music. It had been a couple of years now that I'd stopped doing music altogether. But through the process of being in different bands, I'd decided that I wanted to do my own thing. I had this really high work ethic, and I didn't want to work with other people because I found that most people just didn't have the same kind of discipline or drive that I had, or they thought they were rock stars well and truly before they were, and they weren't really prepared to put in the work. So I decided to do my own project. Taught myself to produce music, and something in me decided to research and to look into different musicians to see if I could find a bit of a pattern as to why or how people ended up getting famous. Because for me, it wasn't an issue of talent. It was, as people always say, it's who you know or being in the right place at the right time. So I was looking to see if I could find some kind of a pattern. And as I researched all these different musicians, I started to go down all these different rabbit holes, and it ended up becoming basically conspiracy research. And pretty much every path that I kind of went down with all these different musicians kept coming back with the same kind of thing. At the end of the path was this secret society of men that seems to control a lot of things in the world called Freemasonry. So I kept looking and all these different things for a good year or two. And I realized that straight up, if you want to make it in the music industry, like to the top of world music, as you probably know, you're going to rep the dark side. So I knew that eventually, if I wanted to make it, I would get tapped on the shoulder and I'd have to represent. So I decided to circumvent the whole process and just join. So I contacted the local institution here in Sydney for the Masons, so the Grand Lodge here in New South Wales. And I organised to start going to some dinners after the Masonic meetings, which was how you joined nowadays. So you had to go and meet them. They got to meet you, basically see that you're not like a freak. You go through like a bit of an interview process. I wasn't a freak, but I was able to hide that enough to be able to get in. So anyway, early on, before I'd even joined the Masons, I was at one of these dinners and I sat down and I was sat next to this higher up Mason who represented Grand Lodge, and his role was basically to go around and visit different lodges to make sure the standards were being maintained. And anyway, so he had a chat with me and he goes, well, why do you want to join Freemason, or why did you decide to join? And I told him the story about how I had consulted a psychic. The first thing she said when she met me was, your granddad's standing here in front of me in Masonic regalia. And I was like, that's all I need to know. It's in the bloodline. I'm doing this. Turns out I don't think he actually was later on. So I actually contacted the Grand Lodge of New Zealand and asked if they had any records of his membership, and they said they couldn't find any. So whether or not this is one of these sort of like familiar spirits lying or whatever, I don't know. I'll probably never know until the next age. But anyway, it convinced me to join. And this guy I was talking to at this dinner, he goes to me, oh, so you believe in spirits and things like that? And I was like, yeah, doesn't everyone? Like, probably be ignorant not to. And he goes, oh, that's interesting. And he started talking to me a bit more. And then he goes, have you heard about this organization called the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis? And I was like, yeah, I have. I knew they were dark because I'd come across them in my research, and I knew sort of like the intimate connection with music as well. For anyone that doesn't know who the OTO is, you may know the name Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley is probably the most famous or revered Satanist of probably modern times. Was very heavily involved in a lot of secret societies. He was a super high up Mason and all these different things. And anyway, the OTO was the organization that he focused most of his energy in, the OTO and another order, which is part of the same body really, called the AA. And Crowley was known as the wickedest man in the world, and he was the inspiration and mentor of people like L. Ron Hubbard, who started Scientology, and Anton LaVey, who started the Church of Satanism. So this guy was a full-on occultist, and the OTO, the maxim of the OTO is, as I was referencing before, do what thou wilt. And the religion behind the OTO is a religion called thelema. So thelema is the Greek word that's used multiple times through the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, for the word will. So it's the word that's used by Yeshua when he says, not my will, thelema, be done, but your thelema be done, with reference to the Father's will. And in the Lord's Prayer as well, he says, your kingdom come, thy thelema be done. So this organization is a full-on satanic organization. The primary key to being able to discover the individual will for everyone is to be able to find this specific path or destiny for our life. It's not just do whatever you want, although that's kind of the very common mentality behind what do what thou wilt means. But really it's about discovering your greater purpose. But I'm becoming more and more convinced that the do what thou wilt being Satan's will. So almost like you're telling Satan to do what he wants with your life. But they focus very heavily around different mystical practices to attain magical power and sort of more sphere of influence on the world. You can direct your thoughts. I won't go into too much detail, but you can direct your thoughts to attain what it is magically and bring into material realm what you want, whether it's fame, power, money, status, all of that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of different things that happen, around different ingestions of bodily fluids and stuff like that for magical powers and potency, and it's witchcraft. So it's the complete opposite of exactly what we stand for here, bro, in our walk. Their Bible is called the Book of the Law. Okay, so it's the complete opposite of what we were doing. Now, I ended up in this organization. I ended up in Freemasonry, did my first initiation into the OTO, and it wasn't long after that I went on a cruise, like an international cruise with Maddie and a couple of friends, which was a 7-day cruise to New Caledonia. And on the second night of the cruise, something definitely happened that was extremely unusual and had never happened before. So I was out with my friend, a different friend, drinking, and we were drinking pretty heavily, which wasn't unusual. But what happened next was particularly unusual. So I blacked out, which again wasn't unusual, but I ended up throwing some 18-year-old guy across the room. I didn't push him over. He went flying across the room, and I ended up assaulting a couple of the security officers so bad that I almost killed one. He had to be taken off the ship and removed because the injuries were so bad. And eventually it took 10 security guards to hold me down, and then even then I stood up and threw them off me. Now, at the time I was 75 kilos or 165 pounds, so not a big guy, but I could feel this surging strength in me that I could do whatever I wanted to do. And it was only in a sense of just reason inside myself that I stopped, because I was like, I'm in the middle of a cruise, in the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship. Where am I going to go for the next 5 days? I'm not going to be able to hide for the next 5 days. So I gave up. Now, I've only got very small fragments of memory from this night. It was pretty traumatic, but I've had a lot of the different pieces filled in from different people. So I gave up at this point after I'd fucked all these people off me. So something supernatural had happened, but I was arrested. I was taken down to the brig, or the boat jail on the boat, which was this tiny little room with completely padded walls, like psychiatric style padding on the walls, a big solid metal door with a porthole window, a tiny little thin mattress, like a single mattress on the floor with a sheet, and that was it. And for the next hour and a half, I just charged my body as hard as I could at this solid door. I was trying to rip the roof off with my fingers. I was smashing on the door with my hand, and afterwards I couldn't feel my right hand for the next month. So I went for an hour and a half. They opened the door, they came in and they sedated me, but that didn't work. And I kept going for another hour and a half. I ripped all the padding off one of the walls with my bare fingers. And then at a certain point, I remember I was in like full psychosis, obviously, and I had this moment breaking and I wanted to kill myself. And I picked up the sheet off the bed and I started to wrap it around my neck, and the door came open. They sedated me again and I was out for a couple of days. So from that point, Maddie and my friends, they had no contact with me. They didn't know what had gone on apart from the head security guy of this cruise ship of 4,000 people. This was a pretty big deal. He contacted them and he said what had happened, that I'd done this damage to this security guard that was really, really bad and I was being held. Maddie was like, is he getting his medication? She hasn't got any change of clothes. And she wasn't able to speak to me. He was like, you're not speaking. So I eventually woke up like a day or two later, and I had pretty much no recollection of what had happened. I was just on the floor in just my undies in this jail cell. They moved me to the next door one because of the damage I'd done to the wall. And I just knew in my gut that something bad had happened. And eventually I stood up and I looked through the porthole window and there was a security guard like sitting outside the door. It was locked from the outside. I couldn't just get out. It was like a jail door. And then eventually the head of security came down and he told me what had happened and that it was bad and that I would be held for the rest of the cruise. And from that point there, I was allowed one phone call after I think a bit of arguing from Maddie with her. She asked me what my circumstances were like. She goes, are you getting a medication? I was like, no. Have you had a change of clothes? No. They were giving me food, but that was pretty much it. And I was just being held in this tiny cell. And she was furious because she said, look, he needs medication. He's got medication he needs every single day. And the security officer was like, I don't care. We'll give it to him if we want to. So Maddie ended up contacting her dad, who's a lawyer. And then she ended up getting in contact with the New Zealand consulate, who then got in contact with the ship's captain. So this was a really, really big deal. And from there, I eventually got moved to a small cabin by myself where I had a security guard placed outside of my door for the rest of that trip. Now, I was told that as soon as I got back into Sydney, that the Australian Federal Police would be waiting to take me and to deport me back to New Zealand. Like, this was how serious it was, and I wouldn't be allowed to come back to Australia. So as we eventually, it was a horrible trip. I won't go into too much detail, but it was really, really bad. It was a bad time.
It doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll go on another cruise, to be honest. But yeah. So anyway, we were going to leave and we were going down, disembarking from the ship and walking out into the passenger terminal in Sydney, and there was no one there. Like, there was no police, nothing. So we just walked away. I know that the Father protected me from that situation. I think in part that the ship was there was probably an element as well of guilt for how they'd held me. And there was basically, the reason why Maddie got in touch with the consulate was because there was human rights offences by the way that they were treating me and just holding me, without charge and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, it was a very long story, but that was the short detail. But I'll let the audience think about what may have happened to me in that state there after my first initiation, bear in mind, to the OTO, and then the supernatural strength that came from that. So anyway, after that period there, I stopped drinking.
Sorry, question. Couple questions. How old are you at the time? And do you want to go into this initiation ceremony at all, or no? You don't have to.
I won't go into like the details of the initiation ceremony or anything like that, because I think it's pretty unnecessary.
It's evil. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's definitely went through different initiations, but at that time I was around 26.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, 26, 27, something like that. So yeah, it was around this time, I may have been actually 28, but I left the ship, stopped drinking for about 9 months because I just saw this really as being the catalyst for why it had happened. I was probably being ignorant at the time around the different things that were happening or why it was such a different event and what had happened to cause the supernatural strength. But the friends that were with me and the people who were around have been reluctant to talk too much about the event because they knew something else had happened. Does that make sense? Like there was probably a genuine fear around what had happened because it wasn't normal, like as in because of the supernatural strength. That was, I guess, a witness to people that there was something else going on other than me just being drunk and crazy, right? So yeah, so it was a really strange time. But during that 9 months, again, I was fixated on making it with my music. So I was getting more and more involved with the OTO. I was doing more initiations, and as I was writing my music, so this new project that I'd created with my music for my individual project, I called I Am Alien. So it was intentionally blasphemous. And as I was writing music, there was definitely something else that was writing music through me. Like a lot of musicians talk about automatic writing. It was definitely channeling. Like it was dark, man. Like the stuff that I was writing, the lyrics I was writing, the topics that I was talking about, it was pure evil, and I was being sucked along this dark path and just fixated on fame. But it was fully being indoctrinated into this OTO mentality. It's really actually very traumatizing and hard to think back a lot about where I was, just because of how far from where I am now it was the complete opposite path, man. Like it was pure evil. So I was going through more of these initiations into the OTO, and eventually I started drinking again because I thought, I can control it now. I've done 9 months of no drinking. I'm definitely in control of this. So I started drinking again, and at a certain time I ended up getting a spiritual mentor in the OTO. So yeah, they do discipleship too. So I ended up getting a spiritual mentor. I was being discipled, and I went to this guy's house one night and I got drunk, and boldly I just said to him, look, I know how this works. I'm prepared to represent the dark side and promote this satanic mentality into the world. I want to be famous. Help me with my music. And the guy goes to me, look, you've proved yourself as loyal and trustworthy. Who do you want to work with? And I said, so-and-so and so-and-so. And he goes, I'll facilitate making that happen. So from this point, I knew what I was doing, and I was definitely making a deal with the devil. So as I was going through these different processes, I do want to clarify that, man, I was torn. Again, I knew God was real. Again, I didn't know him as Yahweh, as what we know him as today, but I knew there was a God, and I knew that I was essentially spitting in his face. Like, it's pretty ignorant to go into like a satanic cult and then not know that the other side is real. So, I was being torn as I was going through these initiations. And once you do the first degree initiation, so there's an introductory initiation in the OTO called the Minerval degree, and they say you're not a full member. But then once you go and do the first degree, what they call the first degree, they say that it creates a spiritual connection with the order that you can never break. So I was torn around whether or not I should obviously do this initiation, but eventually I did, and so on. But I was dead set on wanting to become famous to the point where I was prepared to sell my soul. And honestly, at that point in time, I was prepared to kill, like to get what I wanted, to be able to get famous, just to make something of myself. And I suppose make up for everything that had happened to me in my youth to make me feel unworthy and invalidated. So at the same time, this mentor of mine, he had two disciples, which was me and this other young girl who was around my age. And we ended up starting a romantic relationship. Like, we ended up starting an affair. So I was still seeing Maddie, and then I started seeing this other girl. And she was full on witch, man. Like, it was very, very obvious that she was adept at witchcraft. She was doing some full on demonic rituals, which was doing some weird stuff where there was definitely things happening in this material world as a result of the rituals that she was doing. And this was a big part of what the OTO and the AA do, is it's demonic rituals to bring demons into this world, and a big part of what I think these initiations are designed to do. So we ended up starting this romantic relationship, and she definitely knew a lot more than what I did. And at a certain point, she came up to me and she told me and asked me about an initiation that I would have to go through, and spoke to me in very allegorical language. And she said to me, "Are you prepared to pour all of your blood into the cup of Babylon to become an empty vessel?" And I was like, yeah, whatever it takes, type thing. And from this point here, things started to get pretty dark. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but at this point as well, I'm getting more and more convicted around like wanting to pull out. Like, I'm like, this is getting to the point. There's something in me which was convicting me, like, don't go here, because there's going to be a certain point where you're going to go too far. And I'd been feeling this sense of conviction for the last couple of years as I was going through these different initiations. And I think it was the Father obviously just clearly warning me through my conscience, like, don't go here, because at a certain point you're going to be reprobate. I'm going to let you go. So I was wanting to like pull out of this. I'd broken up with Maddie. I was starting this relationship with this new girl in the OTO, and things were getting more and more intense. She ended up getting pregnant. It was a really, really messy environment. But at a certain point, just for the interest of time, I'm just going to sort of speed this up. I was like, I've got to get out of this. Like, as in, there was something in me that was like, don't do this. So I eventually tried to destroy that relationship with that girl. I wanted my relationship back with Maddie, but this was a very messy period. And whatever was in me at the time, like, I was categorically possessed. I will say hands down, whatever was in me, or whatever multiple things were in me were trying to kill me. And for 2 months, I would wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning. I would drink a litre of red wine, which is 34 fluid ounces, until I would pass out, and I'd just smoke cigarettes. I'd wake up again around midday. I'd drink the same, another litre, another 34 ounces of red wine, and I'd pass out. And I'd wake up again around 6 or 7 p.m. and I'd drink a third litre of red wine. And I'd either drive drunk to Macca's or KFC for my one meal of the day, or I'd pass out until the next day. So during this time I was drinking, I was just smoking, watching porn, watching rubbish TV, whatever, just literally to waste time. But whatever was in me was trying to destroy me. And I got to the point where I was vomiting a couple of times a day just from the acid buildup in my stomach. I was in an absolute mess of a state where, even though there was a bathroom only a few meters that way, I would just urinate into all the empty wine bottles that I had. They were like full of cigarette butts. There was like just rubbish food like all over. I was in an absolute mess of a state of my life. Like, it was bad. So I went like this for about a couple of months, solidly every single day, not working. And the people I was living with at the time, because I was blacking out a lot when I was drunk and I was dark, I started to threaten them. And they were like, "Man, you have to move out, or we're gonna have to call the police." And I was like, "I'm not going anywhere. Like, you can't make me go anywhere." Because I was just full on nuts. And then one afternoon, I got a call from Maddie, because we were trying to like reestablish our relationship. And she very calmly said to me, if you don't check yourself into a psych ward today, I'll never speak with you again. Like all of my abandonment issues, this was like the one good thing in my life. All the abandonment issues that I'd had ever since I was a child, like rushed in. For whatever reason, I agreed to do it. So she booked me an Uber. I traveled to this hospital and checked myself into the psych ward where I was for 3 days before I went to a stabilization unit for another 3 weeks, which was an drug and alcohol stabilization unit. And then from there, I checked myself into the dodgiest rehab in Sydney, which had about 35 guys in it, 33, I think, of which had been paroled there as part of their release from prison. And those guys were all there because of the crimes that they'd committed while they were on crystal meth. So there was only a couple that were there for alcohol and only 2 of us that had checked ourselves in there voluntarily. So it was basically like a prison because they'd all come out of jail. So it was just like a prison mentality. It was a rough environment. And I was like, I'd never, ever want to come back here. I was getting brought to absolute rock bottom. I was so stubborn and so stuck in my ways that the Father had to crush me and bring me to my knees at the gates of hell for me to even be able to turn away to consider this path. So there I was in this horrible rehab, and it was a strange thing, but I spent my 30th birthday in rehab, and it felt like it was a choice where I was leaving the reckless messiness of my 20s behind, and here I was in the lowest place that I could be in rehab, having the choice to transition into a new decade. And it felt like it was sort of a different spiritual initiation where I had the choice to choose a path. But I was certain that I was never going to go back to this place again. I was like, I'd never intended to get to where I got. I've painted myself as a very good villain here, but by no means did I ever intend to hurt anyone, or did I ever intend to be in the circumstance of my life that I was. I am the product of my environment. I'm the product of my childhood, of being a damaged soul. I said before, I was perfectly groomed for someone to go into the occult, to seek fame, to seek validation, I was angry at God, so I went into the complete opposite path, just to spite God. Stupid, because it's only going to hurt me in the end, isn't it? But yeah, this is the way that I went because of my childhood. So I was in rehab, and within the first week, I was just having a look around, and I saw this tiny little bookcase in there, and I'm pretty sure the books were totally untouched. I don't think there was many people in there that were reading many books, but as I was looking through the small selection of books, this one book caught my eye, and I grabbed the Bible. And I'd always wanted to read the Bible. I'd lived my whole life going, how can I live my whole life without reading the most important book in human history? But I'd always found things of greater importance and more priority. But I was in this place where I didn't want to be around these guys. So for every spare moment that I got, I read the Bible from Genesis. Didn't get through a huge amount of it. It took me a long time. And I didn't understand, don't get me wrong, I didn't understand a huge amount of it. I was reading through all the different names. I was reading through the duplications through Kings and Chronicles and stuff. I was like, I have no idea what's going on. But I persevered because just something in me fundamentally knew that this book had the answers to my problems. Like, I don't know what it was, but I was believing it with like a childlike faith I could see now in hindsight. And I just believed it. So I was reading it and reading it and reading it. And as I was in rehab and I was going to a lot of these AA and NA meetings, I didn't want to come back ever to this place again. So I started to listen to every single one of the people who had been successful in their sobriety. And I started to listen to all of the common themes about what I needed to do, which was get rid of the people, places, the things to change my circumstance. And I was dead set on making sure that I had a changed life. So when I got out, I just started to remove all these different things. So to this day, this was 6 years ago, over 6 years ago, I still haven't drunk, have no intention of drinking, don't miss it, don't stress about it at all, doesn't give me any pleasure or any benefit. So I'm happy to not drink of the the wine until I drink it in the kingdom with Yeshua too, right? So that's fine for me. But yeah, went through a big amount of change. But as I came out of rehab, I eventually got kicked out of rehab. It was stupid, but anyway, I did get kicked out of rehab. But I'd learned enough at this stage. And I was sure I wasn't going to go back. So I'd had the seed planted in me of faith. But it wasn't a clean transition for me. I'd left the OTO as I got out of rehab, but I was still involved with the Masons, and I still stayed involved with the Masons for a bit longer after that, thinking it was a bit more innocuous. But as I came out, and I started to get my feet under me again, I was still wanting to make it famous. So I was reading the Bible and I was learning about this faith, but I had yet to fully commit to the path. And I was still being sucked along into wanting fame. So I got out of rehab, and it was probably about September of 2018. And in March of 2019, I filmed a music video, which I'm sure you can edit in or something like that, Luke, which I've showed you and you've seen, but would probably pay for the audience to be able to see as well, where I wrote a song, which again, that wasn't actually me that wrote the song. This took me about 20 minutes to write this song. Something else definitely wrote the song through me. And it was a song called Mum, and it was basically a song with just absolute full of rage and hatred towards my mum, and basically about the things that I wanted to do to her to get revenge for my childhood. But in this video, you can very, very clearly see that there was something else using me. I was channeling in this video, and there was, whether it was one spirit or multiple spirits, I don't know. But there was something else that was using my body to show itself into this world. So around this time, once that video was done, I was promoting it into occult circles, and yeah, it was just dark. But I was now being torn because I was starting to have this conscience growing in me of our faith and becoming aware of Yeshua, and this responsibility to live a different life, which was not so toxic that I'd lived my entire life to be. And at a certain point, I had to stop doing music altogether because it just was eating me alive. Like all I could see myself doing with music was it was just full of hatred and anger. And I just couldn't keep putting myself in this place of having to dig up this murderous rage to be able to perform this music. I couldn't imagine performing it, and it just made me feel sick. So I just had to stop. So I haven't done any music at all, and I just haven't been able to bring myself to do any. Maybe one day I'd like to do some for the Lord, but at this stage, man, like I just haven't touched it again, just because of how far down that path that I went and where I was prepared to go for it. So I gave up music, and during this period over the next few months, no one witnessed to me. No one was speaking to me about God. I was just reading the Bible. And I know in hindsight now that the Father was taking me through a real repentance process. So I was being convicted not to lie, not to steal, not to watch porn. My life was changing. I was being very, very conscious of putting other people before me, which was totally foreign to the life that I'd lived before that. But it got to the point where I was, smoking at the time. I'd flick a cigarette butt and I'd walk off, a good couple of 100 meters away, and I'd be so convicted I'd go back, I'd pick up that cigarette butt and I'd put it in the bin. So I was really just being convicted of just living a better life. And as I was going through this stage, I was reading through the New Testament, and the thing that jumped out to me most, other than of course Yeshua, was I just knew I needed to be baptized, and I knew it should be by full immersion. So one Saturday actually, I spent a couple of hours researching as many churches as I could here in Sydney that would baptize me. And I knew I didn't want it to be in the Catholic or the Anglican Church, just knew I didn't want it to be like that. And I also knew that I shouldn't have to pay for the sacrament as well. So I was very conscious of any church that would try and charge a fee for me to get baptized. And I reckon I probably looked at 50 or 60 different churches. I emailed 2, only. And within an hour, I got a call from a pastor who spoke to me about the Holy Spirit, just spoke to me about my journey. And he basically said to me, look, if you come to our church service tomorrow morning, I'll baptize you after. And I was like, sweet. I was like, I was in the spot where I was like, do I have an excuse? No, I don't. So I jumped at it and I decided to do it. And I wasn't looking for a church at all. I was, as far as I was concerned, they were all corrupt, and all I wanted to do was just get baptized and then just walk on my own. You know, again, I wasn't being discipled.
I have, I guess, a couple questions here, if I can. What made you think churches were corrupt, I guess? Maybe it must have been your previous experience. Or maybe, anyway, that's one question. Maybe I'll start there. Yeah,
I just didn't see a lot of truth in it. You know, I'd come from the Catholic Church as an example, and everyone's seen the history of the Catholic Church with all of the pedophilia, like all that kind of stuff. I've researched conspiracy theories and stuff like that as well, and it doesn't take a too discerning eye to see that there's something not quite right.
Okay. The other one is, did churches really tell you that you had to pay to be baptized?
Yeah, there was plenty of churches that advertised that you had to pay like $150 if you wanted to get baptized or whatever. Yeah.
What? That's crazy. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, it is. Sure. So yeah, I just didn't think I should have to pay for it. There was something in me knew that it should be a free service, freely given, freely received.
It even says that. It says like freely we have received, so freely we give. Okay, last thing is, so was it just the fact that you found the Bible that interested you in this, or was it just because you always, being in the occult or whatever, you always kind of knew there was if there's so much evil, there's also the opposite and equal good, something like that? Or what made you search after being baptized and everything?
Yeah, so with a lot of my conspiracy research and stuff like that, as I was also coming out of the occult, I was aware. One of the big things to me was I was aware that there universally is a group of people that are powerful, and they all seem to worship the same thing. Right? And then as I was going through relearning my worldview and learning about Christmas and learning about the origins of Easter, I just had this conflict of going, why then are we being promoted this? Why is the world being promoted this version of Jesus? Like, why are they promoting Jesus? And I realized that through these big holidays, which we were told were to do with Jesus, Christmas and Easter, which obviously have nothing to do with him, it was a mockery. So it was obvious to me that there was a mockery going on, but it was also like, if the most powerful people in the world worship this God, well, surely the opposite must be true. And it was just kind of a simple thing for me, which pushed me towards this faith. I'd been on the complete opposite, so it was just like, okay, 180, let's go this way now. And it seemed reasonable, and it actually answered a lot of questions that I had about the world. Just made a lot more sense.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was going through this stage of wanting to get baptized. That night I didn't sleep at all. I was convinced that I was going to be killed in my sleep. I was so fearful of something supernaturally happening to me, to being baptized the next day and essentially breaking ties with the dark side spiritually. So I had, very, very little sleep. And I remember as the sun started to rise, I felt this huge sense of relief. Even driving there, I was really, really nervous. I don't know, it could well have been the demons, obviously, that were still in me, obviously trying not to get me to not get in that baptism tank. But I went through the church service. It was interesting now, charismatic church. Again, like I said, I wasn't looking for a church, but they baptized me, which was, it was great. Like, I was really, really glad to get baptized. The next day, I stopped smoking, just totally dropped that. And my life definitely started changing, but I did join that church for a while. They were completely charismatic. But eventually, after about a year and a half of being in that church, this was about COVID time now, I stopped going because they just said that you can only attend church if you get that. And I was like, I'm not getting that, so I'm not coming to church then. And anyway, I had some other disagreements with them because they had some strange doctrine where basically they think that the whole book of Revelation's already happened. So I think it's called preterism or something like that. But so they think that everything happened. And I was like, this is insane. How can you possibly think that? And we were in the middle of COVID and all that kind of stuff. It was a weird time. So me and a friend who were in that church eventually ended up leaving. Like, I'm fully committed to this walk now. And so me and this friend left, and his cousin left as well. We were just having some Bible studies online. And it was during this time I was just really convicted to want to evangelize. So I did this evangelism course with quite a famous street preaching ministry. I won't name names, but I did a 6-month course, and then I started doing a lot of street preaching. So I went out there. It really grew me a huge amount in my faith, just evangelizing and learning to defend the faith, learning the different arguments for why people would say that this walk is not legit. It toughened me up a huge amount. So I was an evangelist for the occult, and now I was recruiting people. I was trying to get people initiated and all this kind of stuff when I was in the occult. And now here I am starting to walk this journey of what I thought was right at the time as I was coming into my early Christian walk, and I was evangelizing a lot. But the issue was that as we were doing this evangelism, I was like, what's the point in doing this? Because where am I going to send people? I was still convinced that every church was corrupt, and I wasn't going to send anyone that was interested in talking to me when I was street preaching to Hillsong. I wasn't going to do that. I was so green to this walk. I wasn't aware of any good legit ministries really. So we just inadvertently, because we actually had quite a few people that were interested in hearing the gospel as we were preaching and getting baptized and all that kind of stuff, we kind of inadvertently started our own ministry. And within months, we had probably 20 people joining in for Bible studies, and we were getting people baptized and all this kind of stuff, and had groups of people going out street preaching. So it was a massive transition, and I learned a lot through that period of time. But eventually, I ended up leaving that ministry behind because it felt very pharisaical. And we come from this mentality that unless you speak in tongues, you're not saved. And that's pretty much what it kind of came down to. And didn't feel like there was a lot of real, genuine love. So it got to the point where I decided to part ways with that ministry. And this was just in the last couple of years now, right? So we're up to just in the last couple of years. And for about nine months or so, I was just on my own. I was not walking with anyone. But a couple of years before, during COVID, I was working in a job that had given me a lot of free time. So I decided to plan my wedding totally in secret from my fiance's knowledge. So I contacted her dad and her mum, who aren't together but separate, and contacted a few of her friends and basically recruited some help. And I started contacting all these different suppliers, food, drinks. We were having the wedding at her dad's place because he's got this beautiful property a couple of hours south of Sydney. He had organised a marquee, all that kind of stuff, bands. So anyway, it was starting to come together, and I had 3 dates in mind, and I just put it to Father. I said, it's either going to be March the 13th, 20th, or 27th. It's going to be whatever day we can get most of the vendors there. And anyway, the wedding date ended up being the 13th of March, 2021. And because it was going to be an outdoor wedding, a couple of months before, I looked and we were talking about, are we going to have a full moon? What kind of moon are we going to have? Because we might need to hire some lighting. So it turned out that date ended up being a new moon. And I don't know really what that meant, but I'd heard of, new moons and stuff in the Bible. So I started to look up what it meant biblically, the new moon. And it turned out that 13th of March, 2021, we got married at 5:00. And that was New Year's Eve in the Hebrew calendar, right? So a couple of hours later, as it transitioned, it would have been the new year. And I was like, oh, this is weird. It's weird that we're getting married on New Year's Eve in God's calendar. Don't worry about the calendar arguments or anything, but this was the date that I could find. It was like the Jewish calendar. So that was weird. it kind of just stuck in my mind. So during this time period of having left this ministry and walking on my own, I just always felt this conviction to want to look into the appointed times. I don't know why. I just had this feeling like they were important, but it wasn't stuff that was ever really taught in Christianity as far as I could see. So I ended up coming across a video which I started with from a ministry, I don't know if you've heard of them, called the Olive Branch Fellowship in the UK. And this guy, Michael, was doing this, it was really good teaching. It was called the Ancient Hebrew Wedding Model. And it was this 4-part series. And I knew that he had this the law is still legit mentality. So I was watching it through a skeptical lens of coming out of Christianity and going, nah, the law's been done away with and we're totally free of all this. But I watched it with an open mind because as I was going through it, the information that he was able to present was phenomenal. And it just completely opened up the Bible to me in a lot of ways. And it was like it's like I had a jigsaw puzzle and just all these pieces started to fill in and I could start to see the Bible a bit clearer. And I couldn't deny that these, the appointed times and things of God's from the Old Testament were still important and made a lot of sense to prophecy and where we are in the world today. So Maddie and I, my wife now, we just spent a lot of time basically binge watching a lot of these different teachings. And in the process, man, I was getting so convicted and torn because I really didn't feel like I could deny that the Torah was still legit. And I just was going through this identity crisis of like, I've been street preaching, I've been telling everyone, the law's been done away with, all this kind of thing, evangelizing. And I decided to read the New Testament through the lens of the law is still valid, like the Torah is still legit, to see if I could catch it out really, or see if I could read it through a different perspective. And I did, I read it, and I couldn't argue it. And I realized, and during these teachings, I realized who Israel was, and it just made absolute sense that there was this continuation of the old through to the new, understanding that Israel is a spiritual nation, not a flesh and blood nation, and the responsibilities of the fact that Israel has a king and we have a constitution and a set of rules for how we're to live, and the appointed times pointing towards future prophecy, from the appointed times that have already been fulfilled and the appointed times to come about Yeshua's return. It just, obviously it all made sense, and it just went bang, 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 bang. All those pieces of the jigsaw puzzle made sense, and I had to be humbled and go far out, like I was wrong. And my eyes were opened and I was totally convicted of it, but reinvigorated when I was like, Israel, this is unreal. Like you realize that you're living in present history, like the history has just continued and I'm part of God's people. Like it was just an unreal revelation. So I ended up getting in contact with the guy from that ministry and was asking about discipleship, because he spoke a lot about discipleship and the importance of that. And he ended up putting me in touch with a rabbi in Melbourne, who you've met, obviously, Phil. And I joined the Imuna Center, and my wife came to faith through it as well. And we've been walking together through this now for just a little over a year. But, my faith journey started, I first got baptized when I was talking about that was in January of 2020. So about 4 and a bit years now into my walk. And dude, my life has changed massively. Like the life that I have today is unrecognizable from the life that I've ever lived. And even just the way that I process the world, the way that I think, my emotions, my self-worth, the things that have haunted me all through my life, that since I've come to this walk, this faith, everything has totally, totally shifted. And obviously it's all glory to the Father, but man, this has been the most unbelievable transformation. I am beginning to really start to feel what that genuine shalom, the peace is just about the state of the world, about the future, my future, whatever future he's got planned, the ability to be able to just sit back and let it unfold. But as I've discussed with you, mate, like, you know, me and Phil here at Immunity Centre, we've got some real plans around the stuff that we're doing to be able to outreach, especially to young people, to young adults, obviously anyone at all. But I've had this hectic testimony, as I was saying to you, bro, and I believe the Father's also given me the ability to be able to share it. I've gone through some stuff that most people will never go through. And honestly, if I was to tell my testimony 20 different times, you'd get almost 20 different versions because of the depth of it. You know, I have to just choose a certain direction. There's main things, but there's so many different areas of things that I've gone through in my life that are relatable for many, many different people. So we're going into churches and to schools to share this message of hope out to people, that there is hope in a world that is very hopeless in a lot of ways, that, as you know, we have the answer here for what people are genuinely looking for. And one of the greatest things that's changed for me personally, which is a message that everyone needs to understand, is that we've all got trauma, we've all got pain. And I lived my entire life as a victim. I saw myself as a victim, and rightly so, because I was a victim, but I lived with a chip on my shoulder, and it was easy for me to stay as a victim, unforgiving, because it meant that I had the right to fail. It meant that I didn't have to take responsibility for my life. But at a certain point, and especially with this walk, we're called to take responsibility. Like, we have to take responsibility for our life, for overcoming the things of the past and for transitioning into this new creation that we are to become. So this is a big part of the responsibility, is I've been at the lowest of lows, and through the Father's mercy, I've been able to have a massive and unbelievable, miraculous transformation in my life. But people need to hear this message of taking responsibility and really taking a very, very good forensic look inside ourselves at the things that are holding us back and that will potentially have hacked us, like I was talking about that virus before, that could cause us to continue to fall, or to not go to the full extent of where our Father wants us to go in Him.
Do you feel like your anxiety is gone now that you are saved and you are a believer?
Yeah, bro. Yeah, definitely. I don't have anxiety. I don't have bipolar. I don't have depression. I haven't been on medication for years. I don't have any of those things. I don't know if it was like demonic stuff or, just really, really lost or whatever. I'm sure it was a combination of all of the above, but I don't have any of that kind of stuff. And I'm totally put my hope and my trust and my faith that the Father has a plan for my life. I always struggled with wondering what my purpose was but I always knew that as I was young, bro, one of the things that kept me going in those really, really hard times when I was a child and going through all that difficulty and all through my life, one of the things that kept me going was I just had this knowledge. There was a light inside me that just knew that there would be a reason why I went through everything that I was going through. There was just something that kept me going and kept me alive, that knew that one day it would make sense as to why I had to go through the stuff that I went through. And now that I sit where I am, and now that I understand my mission to be able to share this testimony, because it's insane, and to be able to convey that to other people, to give them a message of hope and hopefully inspire people to again take more responsibility and to walk and to be more circumspect about the things of the world and the way that the world is geared around. It obviously is a satanic world, and there's a multitude of different ways that the world tries to initiate us and to pull us away from our Father's ways. I've got a lot of insight into all of those types of things. But yeah, man, peace. I have so much comfort in where I'm at in my life. I'm excited too, because one of the things that really excites me right now is that I think that pretty much the whole body feels universally like if we're not already, we're very, very close to being in the end times, if not, one of the final generation. And we could have been alive at any point in time in human history, right? We could have been, they reckon there's been 80 billion souls that have ever lived. I don't know how they worked that out, but that's what they reckon since the dawn of time. We could have been alive at any point in human history. Now, if you're a coach, right, and you're going into the final minutes of the World Cup final of whatever sport you're playing, you're going to have your absolute best players on the field. You're not going to have your C string or D string lineup on the pitch going into those final minutes of normal time, right? So what an honor it is that we are here alive right now at the very, very end potentially of the age, and the things that the Father might have planned to use us for. Like, that's a very exciting prospect.
It is very exciting. It's a good purpose to have. It's a powerful purpose to have. And it's amazing that of all these pharmaceutical drugs and all of this stuff, that faith has saved you from those things. That in itself is beautiful. And there's so many people who go through bullying and anxiety and that sort of stuff right now, especially young kids, that I think that is very important to let them know that there is hope and there is salvation from those things in Yeshua, or salvation. That's amazing.
Yeah, man, there definitely is a deliverance from all of that kind of stuff. And obviously the world is geared around pulling us completely in the opposite direction of anything to do with the Father. And by going into the world, which I did in the worst possible way with the direction that I was going, and I was obviously looking to recruit people for the darkness. Obviously it's real when it's out there, that these people are real and they're out there. But this whole world is not geared towards actually fulfilling what we're all looking for. We're all looking for stability. We're looking for peace. We are, I think, all as a race, a human race, looking for a relationship with the Creator. But this whole world is geared around getting a good job, getting an education, getting married, having children, or having as much sex as you possibly can, getting famous now, living a life that's for other people to live vicariously through you, through social media. And this whole world, like the role models that our kids are being presented with, is just disgusting. And the whole world is filth, and obviously it causes anxiety and depression. One of the things that I speak about is that here in Australia, as an example, 1 in every 5 people today, right now, are currently medicated on mental health drugs, right? 4 in every 10 people in Australia alive today have at some point in their life had a mental disorder, and 1 in every 2 will at some point in their life have a mental disorder. And we just consider this normal. Like, this would be the stats probably in any Western country. It's probably worse in America, actually, in a lot of ways. But in the West, these are the statistics around mental health. And everyone just normalizes this. Oh, it's just normal that I'm mentally unwell and I need drugs to help me live. That's not normal. And this is one of these things I speak about, is this: we've got to be careful about what we normalize versus what's common. And it becomes an excuse, all these different identities that young people now are being fed. We know there's a lot of identity issues that our youth are being fed. But the excuse to fail because you have depression or anxiety and you need medication, it's ridiculous. And we need to be very, very careful about the message that we are delivering to our youth, because, again, like, if you are the enemy, you can see why he would corrupt and destroy the family unit. He would destroy the mum and dad relationship. So the kids get destroyed and grow up insecure. They can't love their heavenly Father because they have a bad relationship with their father and they're traumatized. If you destroy a generation, they're going to grow up and be a destructive leadership. They're going to grow up to be the leaders of our world, and they're going to be destroyed, and then it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So the key, I think, for all of us as people of faith is that we need to do more to reach our youth. Because if we're going to have any chance of doing, anything for our world, and obviously it's going to get worse and worse, we know that. We're not blind to the fact that we can't solve the world's problems before Yeshua comes back. But if we at least can hopefully encourage the next generation to be faithful and bold and share the gospel and to be people that shine the light into the world, then hopefully those people can go on to bring more and more people into the faith through whatever time we have left. But it's irresponsible for us not to look more at the youth and what we can do to hopefully encourage the future generations to grow our faith and reach out through society. Obviously, we should reach everyone, but this is the direction, is that our youth are specifically being attacked. And you can see why, because it is just like a Trojan horse that will eventually destroy society.
100% agree. And it's so important now because these kids all have their own relationship with the phone, which gives them this, portal into the entire world, into any weird thing they want to look up and learn about and idolize and emulate without telling anyone about it. So It's so important that we occupy until Yeshua returns and that we try to make disciples, like you said, wake people up and then train them in paths of righteousness, man.
Yeah, well, there's so many problems that the church is really not doing a great job in, and then porn's a massive one. You said obviously about the phone thing. And if you look at the statistics around porn in the Christian church, it's phenomenal. I think the statistics are something like 50%, these are just, might not be completely accurate, but around these sorts of numbers, where I think about 50% of 18 to 40-year-old men all watch porn at least once a month. I think it's like 2 in 7 pastors are regularly watching porn, like all this kind of thing. And these are serious issues that no one's actually really talking about. And then kids, the statistics for kids is like, on average, children are being exposed to hardcore pornography at around 12 years old. By around 15, most children, I think about 80% of them have seen full-on hardcore porn, and generally a lot of this is violent. So people are getting this happened for me in particular, is you get a wrong education and the expectations around what healthy sex and all that kind of stuff is. This isn't even biblical, but what goes to how women should act when it comes to sex and using women as objects and all this kind of stuff. And that's just one area of things that people are being exposed to. And especially when young girls have got, and I'm just going to be bold here and just say, when young girls have got role models like the Kardashians and stuff like that as the standard for what women should be, and young men are looking up to these rappers that are degenerate and stuff, and they're just dragging them into the pits of hell. We need as a body to be doing far more. And, we're apathetic, we're weak as a body. And like Phil said the other day, the things that, that the Muslims are really good at doing is they are staunch. They don't take rubbish. They're very, very stern and staunch about their faith and what their book says. And we're just apathetic, and we're just whatever. We let things happen. And this is why our societies and our cultures in the West have got to the point that they have, with all of this corrupt filth coming into the church, is just because we haven't actually stood up for our values. And things like porn sneaking into the church, where pastors are addicted to porn, it just shouldn't happen. And no one's talking about it. There's no programs really in any churches to help with this massive issue of 50% of Christians having porn addictions and regularly watching porn. Where is the help? Who can these people go and talk to? Because it's certainly not the pastors that are watching porn. This is just one issue. But this is what I say, this is why it's important for us individually to take real responsibility. It's too easy to just give up and go, well, there's nothing much that I can do. We can't hope to change the world without first changing ourselves, right? We have no right or authority to do anything unless we can be a role model for others. And that is dead set what I've made my life's mission, is to be someone that can hopefully, truly, God knows, stand with a pure heart, as pure as I possibly can, to live this life as best as I possibly can, to hopefully be a role model, to say, if I've come from that, you can too. There's literally no excuse. And the Father can certainly help you to do that.
Praise Yah. I'm so glad you're doing it, man. And this thing of we talked about Islam and how they have this standard that they won't, at least on the front is that they're upholding that standard. Who knows if they are, but the Christian church, the progressive Christian church at least, has rewritten the biblical morality that we read about, that we were supposed to adopt as believers and make our lifestyle. The Muslims, they have their Quran, they keep their Quran. We as believers have made our Baptist morality. We've made our Pentecostal, our charismatic morality, and all of it is slightly different. I mean, most of it's the same, but that's what's so powerful about the Torah movement, is that we have this sovereign morality, and we don't try to split as the Methodists did and said, this is okay being gay and being married and being a pastor, and this is another half of the Methodists said, no, it's not. I mean, this is just one example of reinterpreting or rewriting God's morality. And that's what I love about and am so attracted about the Torah. And I think that this is what's attractive to, hopefully, the youth who want a creator that expects something from them, because all of Western society expects nothing from you, and they just let you luxuriate in this, purposeless existence. But when you have a creator who makes his desires plain and expects you to uphold them and toe the line, that is what gives you power and purpose. And so that's what I love about the Torah. And I don't know, maybe that's can be encouraging to kids too, as you preach this word.
Well, that's how you know the devil's in the church, bro, because the church now has this do what thou wilt mentality, right? They're completely changing. And this is how you know, because I just told you that the satanic maxim is do what thou wilt, and that's Satan's will. So this is what these people have all done and why the church is so corrupt. But if we want to do the Father's dilemma, then we need to come to the Torah and submit ourselves under his authority, which obviously we don't want to do in our natural state, and why the church, the modern church, the progressive church, is so corrupt. And you can tell the fruit that's being produced, right? You'll know them by their fruit. And the fruit that's being produced is, we're just going to do what we want.
Man, there's a lot of work to do, and I'm really glad that you are on the light side now, man. Welcome to the light side. And where can people find you, and where do you want to point people?
Man, people can find me through, I've got, my website is www.jasonblyth, B for Bravo, L-Y-T for Tango, H.com. Instagram's jason.p for papa.blyth. Feel free to reach out to me. A big thing, like I said to you earlier, Luke, that we're looking to do is the body can help us to be able to get this message in front of other people. We want to speak more in schools. If you've got a church community or a youth organization, or you work at a school or anything that you feel that could use this message, reach out, because there's a lot of different things that we and I speak on from my experience, and it can be completely tailored to delivering a specific message on mental health or responsibility, discipline, faith, overcoming trauma and adversity, and all these types of things that have come from my lived experience. So people can reach out to me. I'd love to just even hear if this has encouraged people. Please, make contact. If there's people in Australia that are walking on their own and looking for fellowship or anything, reach out. I can certainly hopefully point you in a good direction. But as well, one of the other things, Luke, is if anyone's in the Chicago area on the 16th of November, I'll be doing a talk which will be geared around a bit about my testimony and a bit more about how the occult and Satanism has pervaded our modern environment and how it can affect the youth of today, and just some things that people can look out for. So it's going to be a free registration event. We'll make sure we have the link in the description for that as well. So if anyone's in Chicago in November, I'll be being flown over there, my wife and I, and we'll be doing a talk on the Shabbat for between, I think, about 12 and 6 p.m. that day. But yeah, I'd just love to hear from anyone. And man, I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you. It's been a really enjoyable experience, and getting to know you has been pretty awesome.
I loved it too, man. We will link to all that below, and thank you for what you're doing. Yeah, that's exciting about Chicago. Let's keep in touch, man.
Yeah, totally, bro. And if you can make it to Chicago, love to give you a hug.
I know, it would be great to meet you someday. We'll see. If maybe I can make it. If I can't, I hope to meet you at some point.
Well, I've put you on the spot now.
I know. Well, we'll see. We'll see. All right. Well, have a good day, sir. I created a Patreon so I could kind of help support this thing. But what it has morphed into is a incredibly fun once a month digital gathering where we all the patrons and I get together and talk about the Torah, talk about our lives, talk about questions we might have, problems we're running into. And so if that sounds like something you are interested in, or if you just want to support the podcast, then join our Patreon. It's patreon.com/thelifewithluke. Thank you so much for watching.